Chapter 1. Shadows of Ruin. Vraxos Magna had once scraped the stars. Its hive spires rose like titanic monoliths into the cloud-smeared heavens, bastions of imperial glory stretching beyond the clouds, crowned with cathedrals to the god-emperor, ringed with bastion turrets and voxmasts like the spines of a crowned beast. Now, those same towers lay in ruin, collapsed upon themselves like broken bones, their sacred geometry fractured by the weight of centuries and the memory of fire. The air was thick with gray ash, swirling in slow, listless vortices between rusted Faro Creek pillars and shattered transit rails. The remains of the upper hab levels, once homes to billions, had become hollowed hives of silence, stripped of life and riddled with ruin. Fires had long since died, but their scars remained, carbon-blackened metal, twisted support beams like the ribs of some god-beast gutted in place, and the stench of old ozone still lingering in the cracks of the world. Somewhere in the murk, a servitor moaned, a half-dead echo of machine life, its torso pinned beneath collapsed rubble, hydraulic fluid seeping out like blood. One servo claw still twitched, tapping against a fallen Aquila plate in slow, pathetic rhythm. Above, a broken voxmass sparked intermittently, sending out fragmented binary howls into the void. A tremor passed through the ash. Not wind, not storm. Something moved. From beyond the skeletal frame of a ruined Prometheum tower, a towering silhouette emerged, parting the ashen fog like a ship through oil-slicked waters. Plates of ivory ceramite, gold trim, dulled and chipped, bore the weight of a great war engine. Pistons hissed with every step, reactor vents growled, bleeding superheated exhaust into the air. A long, reaper-mattern chainsword hung at its flank like a knight's great blade. Upon its carapace, the heraldry of House Dravon, a split field of obsidian and crimson, overlaid with a silver chalice wreathed in thorns, burned through the grime. The Imperial Knight Titan Oathbound Wrath had returned to Vraxos, and inside its adamantium heart, tethered by Mayu cables and immersed in haptic feedback gel, sat Sir Caelus Dravon, high scion of his house, vengeance burning behind narrowed eyes. He did not speak. He did not pray. The cockpit around him pulsed with dim crimson lumen strips. His body was locked into the throne mechanicum, spine jacks laced to his vertebrae, every nerve firing with input from the machine spirit of the ancient knight. His breath was steady, his heart was not. His fingers brushed the haptic controls, each movement echoed in the knight's limbs. Caelus was the oathbound wrath now, and he had come to hunt. Broken spire loomed ahead, the remnants of a manufactorum once responsible for crafting laser rifle power cells by the megaton. Now it lay in twisted ruin, walls caved inward from long-forgotten orbital bombardment. Massive glyphs of the Adeptus Mechanicus had been defiled, smeared in dried ichor, melted by sorcerous flame, or desecrated with symbols that seethed with a wrongness even after centuries. One such glyph caught his eye. It had been carved recently, a jagged symbol of eightfold symmetry, etched in gnarled strokes across the wreckage, its grooves filled with congealed blood. The viscous, black-red ichor shimmered faintly, as though resisting the ash. Around it, the walls were scorched in a wide ring, like something massive had exhaled a burst of tainted flame. Caelus narrowed his eyes, and the Vox spirit hissed to life in his ears. Caelus Dravonon. The voice crackled with static and rot, soaked in metallic distortion, but its menace was unmistakable. It was the voice from his nightmares, the voice that had haunted his training, the voice his father had last heard before being torn in half and left to rot beneath the ruins of Vraxos. Malmoth the Desecrator, the corrupted knight, a former scion of an unknown house, lost to time and treachery, twisted into a mockery of all noble war engines. Malmorth now served darker gods, his armor clad in brass and black, his limbs twisted with demonic plating and broken relics. His vox howls were part machine, part madness, part prayer to the warp. Caelus stared at the blood rune and felt the oath-bound wrath stir beneath his touch. The Knight's spirit hated this place, hated the rune, hated the name of Malmorth. The air shifted again, heavier this time. Something scraped across the edge of Ospec's range, a low sound, like a giant dragging a weapon across rusted ferrocrete. Caelus tensed, hands tightening on the controls. The Auspex blinked, no lock, but something was there, something watching. Malmorth. Caelus muttered, voice low, biting. The vox crackled again, and then silence. It wasn't just a duel of blades that had begun. It was a war of nerves, of patience, of who would break the silence first. Caelus urged the oath-bound wrath forward, deeper into the corpse of Vraxos Magna. Every shattered boulevard was a kill zone, every overhanging ruin a possible ambush point. The sky above, choked with storm and smoke, bled faint green light from hidden clouds, the afterbirth of ancient warp contamination. The God Emperor's light struggled to pierce here. He passed the remnants of a crumpled hab district where scorched skeletons still clung to barricades and flak cannons pointed at a sky that had never saved them. A broken Lehman Russ turret lay half-submerged in rubble, its main gun twisted backward like a snapped limb. Scattered around it were the bones of Astra Militarum crews, bleached, burned, and shattered. Further in, at the center of a wide plaza, a monumental statue of Saint Travanus the Redeemer had collapsed, its head cracked in half, the once beautiful face worn smooth by centuries of ash. Across the remnants of its chest, another chaos rune had been carved, less precise, frenzied. Malmorth wanted him to see these things. The ruins weren't just a battlefield, they were a theater of madness, a playground for the desecrator. And yet Caelus felt no fear, only the rising pressure of a blood debt long unpaid. He stopped at the plaza's center. Let the Knight stand tall amidst the corpse statues and shattered faith. "I am here," he said, opening the Knight's vox. His voice boomed across the ruins, the vox chorus amplifying it with mechanized reverence. "Mormoth? Desecrator, coward of Vraxos, I am Caelus, son of Halric, high Scion of House Dravon, and I have come to end you." You, for a moment, nothing. Then, a scream erupted through the ruins, a vox howl layered with demon tongues and grinding iron, loud enough to shake the ground. It came from everywhere. It came from nowhere. Caelus tightened his grip. The challenge had been accepted. The duel had begun. Chapter 2. Iron in the Blood. The throne room of House Dravon was a cathedral of metal and memory. Within the bastion fortress of Ebenhold, carved into the side of Mount Gostus like a blade plunged into stone, the walls were hung with banners older than some imperial worlds. Tattered standards bore the names of ancient scions long returned to the throne of the Emperor: Valdus the Unbroken, Mira Dravon of the Black Flame, Toric the Pale, each rendered in threads of gold and blood red, suspended beneath rust-streaked iron vaults. The chamber echoed with the solemn toll of auto bells, marking the hour of ceremony. At the center of it all stood the throne mechanicum, mounted atop a dais of obsidian, its structure humming faintly with machine spirit activity. 1,000 neural filaments writhed gently like silver seaweed in the air around it, hungry for flesh. Ancient bronze plates formed its exoskeleton, marked with the sigils of the Adeptus Mechanicus and crusted with unspoken circuitry designed not for comfort, but for control. Before it stood Caelus Dravon, clad in the sable and crimson of his house, his bare chest painted with sacred oils and burning incenses. His youthful frame was wiry and coiled, but his eyes betrayed no arrogance, only a quiet intensity, barely masking the weight of expectation behind them. The tech adept beside him, garbed in rust-colored robes and bearing an incense censer shaped like a screaming cherub, intoned the rite in Benharic litany. Unit Candidate Caelus, soul of the flesh, heir of the iron lineage, prepare for binding. The Magos turned and two servitors advanced with mechanical precision, carrying the neural spine clamp, a cage of steel and living circuitry designed to interface directly with the pilot's nervous system. Caelus didn't flinch as it was lowered toward his back. He had trained for this moment since childhood, every day since his father died. The pain was exquisite. As the neuroclams bit into the base of his skull and along his spinal column, thousands of thin metallic tendrils bored into his nerves with a sensation that was less physical and more invasive, like thoughts being chewed apart and reassembled. He felt the rush of alien presence before he saw anything, the oath-bound Wrath's machine spirit coiling around the edges of his mind like an ancient serpent waking from slumber. His vision blurred, and then clarity hit him like a thunderstrike. Suddenly he stood within the cockpit of the Knight. The cockpit was not real, not in the conventional sense, but it was how his mind interpreted the internal landscape of the bond. Lights flickered in time with heartbeats. He was surrounded by 1,000 whispering voices, memories of past scions encoded into the machine like ghosts. The voice of his great-uncle, his grandfather, and beneath them all, like tectonic rumble beneath the sea, the growling voice of the machine spirit itself. "Who walks my halls?" The words were not spoken. They were felt. Caelus breathed in, blood seeping from his nose under the strain of initial contact. His hands gripped the control handles out of instinct, even though they weren't truly there. "I am Caelus, son of Halric. I claim the bond." A silence followed, stretching for what felt like minutes, before the cockpit bloomed in golden light, and the specters fell away like mist under sunfire. A great heartbeat shook the structure. The Knight had accepted him. Years passed in steel and flame. Training was merciless. Every waking hour of Caelus' adolescence was spent in simulation chambers and training grounds. He sparred in exo-rigs with older scions, bested only rarely and never twice. Tutors of the Adeptus Mechanicus grilled him in the complex mechanics of night maintenance. High Chaplain Varnus taught him the litanies to calm the spirit of his knight during combat. But it was not the mechanical instruction that weighed on Caelus most. It was the legacy. Each time he entered the bonding chamber, he felt the presence of Halric, his father. Not as a voice, not even a memory, just an imprint, a cold, sorrowful silence in the place his mind should have been. The oath-bound wrath had loved Halric. Its rage and grief simmered in the machine spirit's marrow, and Caelus felt it. Felt the loss, felt the shame, because when his father fell, only the crest remained. A warped, blackened emblem of House Dravon, torn from the wreckage of a knight, reduced to a molten carcass somewhere in the ruins of Vraxos Magna. The retrieval team found it fused to a piece of shoulder armor the size of a tank. That was all that remained. No cockpit. No data core. No corpse. Just the crest. They said Halric died well, that he faced the traitor knight, Malmorth, in open combat, giving the remnants of the 92nd Dravian Guard time to retreat from the collapsing hive city. They called it a noble death. Caelus only saw failure. He had been a child then. He remembered watching from the walls of Ebenhold as the crest was carried up the stone steps, blackened and steaming. The sky had been blood-red from the fires that still clung to the horizon of Rexos. His mother had stood stone-faced, a single tear tracing a line down soot-streaked skin. Caelus had cried in silence, unseen, and now Now it was his burden. In the training arenas beneath the fortress, Caelus had fought simulation after simulation of night duels. The final exam, the trial of iron, had left him with a fractured rib, a torn deltoid, and mild cerebral trauma from the overstrain of full-thrown synchronization. He passed, but just barely. In his dreams he faced Malmurg. He saw the traitor's desecrated knight, a towering abomination clad in scorched brass and rusted chains. Its helm was a horned skull visor, draped in flayed banners from fallen enemies. Its chainsword was not a weapon, it was an altar, carved with screaming demonic faces that sang when it killed. A hell lion, warped by the dark mechanicum, guided by a mind long surrendered to ruin. And in these dreams, Caelus always lost. His knight would fall, the machine spirit would scream, his flesh would be torn from his bones, and the crest, his family's sacred crest, would be taken, spat upon, and cast into the fire. He stood now in the cathedral of steel, the neural implants laced permanently into his spine, his place on the throne mechanicum earned, but never quite deserved. Not in his own mind. As he paced through the vault of names, a solemn corridor deep in the bastion, where every Dravon knight's helm was preserved after death, he paused before his fathers. Halric Dravon, Scion of Steel, martyr of Vraxos. The plaque bore no corpse, just the blackened helm retrieved from the wreckage. The visor was still warped from whatever unholy flame had consumed it. Caelus looked into the glass, seeing his reflection, overlaid with the melt-scarred ruin of his father's death mask. "I will find him," he whispered, and the voice of the oath-bound wrath stirred faintly in the back of his mind, like the rumble of distant artillery. Now, as he trudged through the corpse city of Vraxos, with ash clinging to the knight's leg plating and echoing winds howling through broken cathedrals, he remembered that promise. His training, his pain, the crest, and most of all, the shame that still clung to his blood like iron dust. He would find Malmork. He would see his father avenged, or his bones would lie beside the crest, broken and blackened, like the oath he dared not fail. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Machine. The ruins of Vraxos Magna did not merely sleep. They breathed. With every measured step the oath-bound wrath took across the shattered ferrocrete boulevards, the city exhaled dust, stirred echoes long buried, and loosed whispers from the mouths of broken statues and shattered shrines. The silence was a predator here, oppressive and watchful, pressing in on all sides like the weight of a collapsing cathedral. Each thunderous footfall of the night was met with metallic moans from twisted girders, the clatter of debris tumbling from some unseen ledge, or the dull, percussive thud of far-off things shifting beneath the rubble. Caelus sat within the throne mechanicum, eyes flickering across the lumen-washed instrument panels, sweat beading on his brow beneath the cold embrace of the neural interface. The oath-bound wrath's sensors scanned in a slow rotating sweep, Auspex arrays hissing static as they reached into the ashen void, searching for signs of movement, of power signatures, of life, or worse, of its absence. He passed beneath the skeletal remains of a fallen skytram, its tracks twisted into a crumpled tangle of scrap-like vines writhing around a corpse. The tram itself dangled overhead, rusted carriages still faintly painted in faded red and white livery, advertising destinations long turned to dust. Half of the vehicle was gone, torn away by some long-past explosion, its jagged remains jutting like iron teeth. The knight's massive shoulder clipped a section of the dangling tram, sending it crashing down behind him in a wail of screeching metal. The sound echoed through the ruins, long and accusing. A warning. Caelus hissed under his breath. He knew he was being watched. Every ruined plaza, every broken manufactorum, Every burnt-out shrine of the Emperor was a potential ambush point. The shadows of fallen saints loomed like sentinels from their shattered plinths, each one twisted by the centuries into warped silhouettes. The eyes of their statues seemed to follow him, hollow sockets filled with ash and spite. He turned down an access road choked with wrecked chimeras and skeletal remains, guardsmen of the 92nd Dravon, their bones still encased in ceramite and flak armor, helmets shattered, weapons rusted to useless nubs. Many of them bore signs of brutal melee, helmets crushed inward, torsos split wide open as if by some massive chain blade. Some had been impaled on rebar or dragged behind vehicles until their bones ground to powder. But it was the walls that made Caelus pause. Across the scorched plasteel of a nearby hab facade, a massive gouge had been torn through a mural of St. Dravonus purging the Xenos. The art had been corrupted by claw marks the size of tank treads, deep, uneven, and angry, slicing through both metal and stone like parchment. Further up, just beneath a half-collapsed Aquila emblem, was another sign. A corruption sigil, drawn in viscous black-red ichor that refused to dry despite the centuries. It pulsed faintly with malign light, like a wound that had never healed. The Aquila above it had been split down the middle, its twin heads twisted in opposite directions, crying blood. Caelus stared, his breath catching. His fingers tensed on the haptic rig controls. Machine spirit, brace. We are close. The oath-bound wrath let out a low groan, half-growl, half-mechanical confirmation as its reactor thrummed louder. A shiver passed through the knight's limbs. The bond deepened. For a brief moment, Caelus felt the echo of something ancient stir in the throne's core. Not memory, but instinct. Danger. Then the auspex crackled, a signal. Faint. Weak. A Knight-class engine just at the edge of detection. Shield signature degraded. Power levels inconsistent. Coordinates, 3 clicks northeast, at the edge of the collapsed Manufactorum district. Caelus narrowed his eyes. He magnified the scan, rotated the feed, confirmed it matched the signature of a Knight chassis. Could it be Malmorth? Was he wounded? Hiding? Too easy, too perfect. The thought flickered through Caelus's mind like a warning glyph, but his blood was already roaring. This was the first real contact since he'd entered the city. He could not pass it by. He moved. The Manufactorum loomed like a decapitated colossus, its roof gone, walls sheared open, massive cranes frozen in mid-measure, as if the building had tried to scream before it died. Scattered below were half-finished tank hulls, rusted Munitorum crates, and broken servo rigs locked in death poses, some still fused with their operators' skeletons. As Caelus approached, the signal strengthened. Within the ruins, the machine spirit stirred again. Uneasy. He slowed, switched to thermals. Nothing. Then auspex again, the heat signature. Static, close, directly ahead. He pushed forward. The oath-bound wrath stepped over the collapsed gate, crushing a bulkhead beneath its foot, its chainsword humming faintly as it rose into a ready position. The heat signature resolved. Knight. Rather, half of one. An empty, ruined carcass of an Imperial Knight lay on its side, partially buried in rubble. Its paint had been stripped, its cockpit gutted, its limbs shattered. The signal was coming from a beacon placed inside the wreckage, broadcasting an old Knight template power signature on a loop. It's a trap. Caelus spat. Too late. The floor beneath him exploded upward. With a shriek of tearing metal, the ground shattered as a colossal form burst from the collapsed sublevel, a monstrosity of iron and horror, its armor scorched brass and oozing warp filth. Its helm was a spined skull mask, its carapace mounted with jagged trophies, knight helms, crushed hull plates, a flayed corpse nailed to a rusted heraldic shield. Malmoth the Desecrator roared to life, chainsword screaming as he erupted from concealment like a demon from the warp. Caelus shouted and triggered the Oathbound Wrath's retros, kicking the knight backward but not fast enough. The impact came like a freight train. Malmorth's chain blade slammed into Caelus's left shoulder armor, grinding across the plating, vomiting teeth and sparks. The Oathbound Wrath staggered with a tortured scream as ceramite fractured and coolant lines burst in steaming gouts. A deep gouge now marred the heraldic pauldrons of House Dravon, hot blood seeping from the wound where the machine spirit bled through. Caelus gritted his teeth, pain flooding up his spine from the feedback systems. The throne bit back when the knight was hurt, and this was personal. "Come on, you bastard!" he roared, and brought his own chainsword up. The two titanic war engines clashed in the heart of the Manufactorum ruins, swords grinding together in a screech that split the very air. The sound was deafening, seismic. Metal screamed against metal as ancient warplate met corrupted hellsteel. Sparks cascaded like fireworks as the blades locked, then broke apart. Malmorth spun, shoulder-slamming into Caelus and sending him crashing backward into a support tower. Steel crumpled under the Oathbound Wrath's weight. Caelus retaliated with a blast from the thermal cannon, point-blank. The shot caught Malmorth across the torso, scorching away layers of demonic filth and brass plating. The traitor staggered, parts of his left pauldron melting and screaming with unnatural voices. But he didn't fall. He laughed, a crackling vox scream layered with static and madness. Caelus lunged forward with the chainsword, aiming for the joint at Malmorth's hip, but the Desecrator twisted with unnatural speed, bringing his Reaper Claw to bear and raking it across the Oathbound Wrath's thigh. Metal shrieked, systems screamed. Warning glyphs burst across Caelus' HUD. Pain lanced up his spine as the limb partially locked. "Damn you!" Caelus backed off, limping, kicking debris in a semicircle to buy space. But Malmor was already circling, herding him, boxing him in. Then he saw it. The overpass. Above them, a cracked transport flyover, supported by a few ruined struts, groaned under the weight of war. Caelus made a decision. He charged. Malmorth roared in surprise as the Oathbound Wrath surged forward with renewed ferocity. Chain, sword, and claw clashed again, but this time Caelus pushed, forcing them both under the base of the fractured overpass. A quick vent of plasma shot at a support strut. Boom. The overpass collapsed in a cascade of girders and rubble, burying Malmor beneath a mountain of plasteel and ferrocrete, his final bellow drowned in the roar of falling ruin. Caelus staggered free, his knight limping, smoke bleeding from vents, armor cracked and leaking. "Damage report," he coughed through blood. Several warning glyphs blinked in crimson. "Internal bleeding. Cooling systems overloaded. Servo control lag increasing." But he was alive, and Malmorth was not yet finished. Caelus turned and limped into the misted ruins, shadows swallowing his form, as the rubble behind him began to shift. Chapter 4. Ghosts of Vraxos. The Oathbound Wrath limped through the nightmarish desolation, every step trailing sparks and visceral black oil from its wounded leg. The massive knight, regal even in its damaged state, left gouged footprints in the ash-choked stone as it moved deeper into the heart of Vraxos Magna, away from the collapsed Manufactorum and the cratered remains of the ambush. Steam hissed from damaged heat vents. Servo limbs twitched with imperfect rhythm. The machine spirit seethed in frustration within its core, its pain a presence of snarling static and erratic pulse signals that battered Caelus's mind. He could feel it. Anger. Not his own. The knight's. The bond between pilot and godmaken was intimate, more visceral than any human connection. When the knight bled, Caelus felt pain. When its wrath stirred, he tasted iron on his tongue. But now, there was only exhaustion. Machine and man both faltered as they fled deeper into the city's dead veins. A vast, open plaza came into view, choked with statues blackened by time and war, each one melted, shattered, or defaced. A cracked roadway wound through the rubble toward an ancient imperial chapel, half sunken into the earth like a relic half swallowed by the grave. Its spires leaned inward, cruciform buttresses bent and crumbling. The gilded aquila above the entrance had been split, its head severed and melted by sorcerous fire. Yet still it stood. Caelus guided the oath-bound wrath toward it. The main archway of the chapel had long collapsed, but the reinforced service entrance, once used by ecclesiarchy priests and munitorum scribes, remained half intact. Caelus disengaged from the war harness with a grunt, pain lancing through his spine as the neural connectors retracted from his skin with wet mechanical snaps. Blood ran in thin rivulets down his back, mingling with haptic fluid. He descended using the knight's emergency lift, boots crunching onto broken stone. The chapel loomed around him, a broken sanctum of faith and fire. Inside, the air was thick with soot and silence. Pews lay scattered like bones, most turned to charcoal. Broken incense censers hung from chains above, swaying slightly in the still air, as if stirred by ghosts. Candles had long since burned out, yet their wax remains clung to walls and corpses alike. The smell of death lingered, not fresh, but embedded in the very stone. At the far end of the chapel, before a shattered altar, bodies were still heaped. Civilians, old, young, some still in tattered ecclesiarchal vestments, huddled together in piles where they had died, clutching each other, their bones fused by the fires that took them. Some had been shot, others simply burned. Caelus' breath caught in his throat. "Throne," he murmured, stepping past a scorched mural of the Emperor's Ascension, now cracked down the middle, as if the God-Emperor himself had turned away in grief. He paused before the altar. The icon of the Emperor, once serene and golden, had been carved away, replaced with a crude symbol of the dark gods. 8 bloody strokes, charred into the stone with some crude heat weapon, formed the mark of chaos, undivided. He reached out and touched it. The stone throbbed, faintly warm. The desecration wasn't centuries old. This had been tended recently. Malmorth had passed this way. Caelus retreated into a side chamber, once a vestry, now little more than a ruin filled with shattered stained glass and rusted reliquaries. There he set up a temporary command node, activating an interface relay between himself and the oathbound wrath, still standing vigil outside, wounded but alert. He placed his hands on the MIU link plate and closed his eyes. "Oathbound, hear me." The link flared to life. For a heartbeat his mind was flooded with static and pain, images of the recent battle crashing into his psyche in flashes of rage and humiliation. The night howled in binary tongue, its fury raw and unchecked. "Easy," Caelus breathed through clenched teeth. "Calm yourself. We endure." The static dulled. The images softened. Rage was replaced by a low rumble, like a great beast sulking in the dark. He pressed deeper into the bond. This was no simple command interface. The throne mechanicum was a sacred relic, half machine, half spirit, housing the echoes of countless pilots and a fractured ancient AI. To command a knight was not to pilot it. It was to fuse with it. Man and God, machine as one. "You fought well, old friend." The knight responded in a wordless flood of sensation, pain, pride, anger, desire. It wanted to return, to finish what had begun. But it knew, too, that its frame could not survive another strike like Malmorth's. For now, they would wait. As Caelus rested, he sifted through the archived Vox records collected from local noosphere echoes and relays embedded in the chapel's remaining data nodes. By miracle, or curse, some had survived the warp blast that gutted the city. He played the first. A man's voice, civilian, panicked, and not human. I saw one, 7 meters tall, all brass and teeth. They said the Arbites could hold the gates. They were wrong. Oh God, Emperor, we were wrong. Crackling. Screams. Then silence. Another. This is Arbites Officer Jurat. I repeat, Hive Sector 9, Theta has fallen. Tech priests dead. Civilians unaccounted for. We require immediate Vox static. The night's gone mad. It's killing everything, even our own. May the Emperor... Then a third. A whispering voice. Raspy. Tired. This is Magos Dominus Vol. Vraxos is lost. The warp taint has spread into the Manufactorum cores. A knight, a Dravian class has fallen to the ruinous powers. I tried to purge him. I failed. The throne? It screamed. I saw the machine spirit cry. Caelus froze. He replayed the last sentence, again, and again. Dravian class knight. A Dravian. Like the oathbound wrath. Like those used by House Ralvorn. Caelus sat back, breathing heavily. Sweat cooled against his skin, and the chill of the chapel seemed to deepen around him. And then, like a blade-piercing memory, came the name. Alixvarn. Once a noble scion of House Ralvorn. Favored heir, revered duelist, known for his unmatched synergy with his knight glory untarnished. But on the 14th day of the siege of Rexos, something had changed. He had vanished from the war front for 7 hours. When he returned, his knight was different, its colors muted, its heraldry burned away. Its machine spirit, once proud and noble, screamed over Vox with voices that did not belong to men. The change was irreversible. Arm had opened himself to something beneath the city. Some whispering presence in the deep Manufactorum catacombs. Perhaps a cult, perhaps a fragment of the warp. But he returned as Malmorth, the Desecrator, the Wyrm-crowned, the first of the Nightwalkers of Chaos on Vraxos. He had slaughtered 3 other night pilots in his escape from the Ralvorn bastion. Their remains were used to decorate his armor. His own mother, the matriarch of House Ralvorn, was bisected from neck to groin in a duel that lasted 12 seconds. His knight had changed, warped. Where once stood glory untarnished, now rose a towering abomination clad in shrieking metal, carved in runes that bled. Its chainblade, once engraved with noble prayers, was now fused with demonic circuitry. It hissed, it breathed, it hungered. Alixvarn no longer existed. It was only Malmorth. Caelus clenched his jaw. The fire inside him flared again. Not just vengeance now. Understanding. Malmorth had once been a scion like him. A noble, a servant of the throne. And he had fallen. Not quickly, not by a single act, but slowly, eagerly, like a man seduced by the storm and then drowned in it. Could it happen again? Could it happen to him? He looked down at his blood-slicked hands, felt the cold metal still tethered to his spine, felt the machine spirit stirring inside the wounded knight outside. Angry, hungry. Whispers echoed faintly through the chapel. Not Vox, not memory, not machine. Whispers in the stone. He turned toward the altar again. The Chaos rune glowed ever so faintly in the dark, as if aware of his presence. Caelus spat on it. I am not you, he whispered. He returned to the lift, mounted the oath-bound wrath, and sealed himself back into the throne. The knight groaned in welcome. Their bond deepened. And somewhere, beneath Vraxos, the earth rumbled, as if in laughter. Chapter 5. Predator and Prey. The hunt had changed. What began as a duel had metastasized into something slower, crueler, a game of teeth bared in shadow. In the crumbling arteries of Vraxos Magna, beneath the broken sky and the rusted bones of civilization, Malmorth the Desecrator stalked his prey not as a rival, but as a predator. And Caelus Dravon, for all his valor and fury, now felt what it was to be hunted. Ash still fell in slow sheets through the air, choking every ruined street, muffling the distant growls of war engines. Thunder rolled overhead, low and ceaseless. Warp storms flickered far above the city's toxic cloud line, casting sickly green lightning across the horizon. The ruins below were a maze of collapsed structures, shattered pipelines, and tower skeletons leaning like dying giants over the flood-swollen arteries of the lower hive. Caelus maneuvered the oath-bound wrath through the tangle of rust and ruin, each footfall of the war machine carefully placed to avoid debris that might betray his position. His knight limped still, but it was battle-ready, reactor humming low like a beast breathing in its sleep. Over the hours since the chapel, he had rerouted damaged coolant lines, recalibrated servo-torque relays, and reinforced his knight's injured leg with scavenged support struts from an abandoned defense platform. It was not elegant, but it would kill. And kill it must, for Malmorth was near. He could feel the pressure of the traitor knight's presence like a shadow draped across his mind. The machine's spirit of the oath-bound wrath had grown erratic again, spitting sparks of hate and aggression, snarling in Binharic whispers that slithered down Caelus's spine. "Easy," he whispered through gritted teeth, fingers moving through calming haptic gestures on the command array. "Steady, brother, I know." "He's here." They'd crossed paths again, if only fleetingly. Flashes of movement on the auspex, heat signatures vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Footprints the size of a rhino APC crushed into the muck and concrete. Chunks of ceramite armor left like flayed skin, smeared with sigils that writhed when stared at too long. And worse, the cherubs. Corrupted servo-cherubs, grotesque mockeries of imperial sanctity, now hovered through the streets on broken anti-grav units, their wings patchworks of flesh and scrap, their infantile faces twisted into masks of perpetual agony. Some still sang, twisted, looping vox clips of ecclesiarchal hymns rendered in shrieking, Binaric tones. Praise, praise, praise the carrion throne, in screams of boiling blood. They floated in packs, scanning for heat and signal traces, whispering coordinates through demonic frequencies. Caelus had shot down 3 already. Each time, they exploded, bursting in fireballs of toxic bile and shrapnel. The 4th had tried to cling to his knight's carapace, pumping corrupted code into the Vox axoner until the oath-bound wrath nearly blacked out. He stopped shooting them. Now he avoided them. But it wasn't just cherubs. There were other things, too, twisted servitors, cobbled together from corpses, tank treads, and sacrificial altars. They crawled through the wreckage like insects, their rusted limbs twitching with cruel precision, their ocular lenses glowing with unholy script. Some of them sang, some screamed, all of them searched. Caelus retreated into a collapsed hab complex, overlooking a flooded sector. Once, these buildings had housed thousands. Now they were half-submerged, waterlogged towers of corpses and algae-coated ferrocrete. The lower levels were flooded up to the first 5 floors, turned into a toxic basin of drowned bodies and reeking runoff. Here, he laid traps. He rerouted power from a still-humming cogitator to a half-buried defense laser array, its barrel warped but functional. With patient calibration, he locked it to a passive infrared trigger, Anything over 6 meters tall moving within 30 degrees of arc would be incinerated. He then seeded the road leading to it with a cluster of mag-seeker mines, scavenged from the dead hands of a Skitarii. Next, he rigged a collapsed sky bridge to detonate if disturbed, using a timed DEET pulse and a snapped hydraulic line as a makeshift tripwire. And then he waited. He began with a sound of scraping metal. Slow, deliberate, massive. Something moved through the waterlogged ruins, a presence that made the walls tremble with its passage. Caelus flicked through the night's Auspex feed, watching as the sensors twitched and glitched. Malmorth's presence causing distortions in vox and vision alike. Then came the voice. Not through vox, not through speakers, not even through air. Inside his mind. "Come out, little knight. You wound me, then hide? Is that what your father taught you? Crawl in the dark like vermin?" Caelus grit his teeth as pain lands through the throne mechanicum, data spikes trying to claw into the knight's cortex. He pushed back with iron focus, reinforcing the bond, locking Malmorth's intrusion out. Not today. Then, movement. Malmor's knight burst from the side of a crumbling hablock like a beast from a cage, masonry exploding outward, trailing cables and screaming debris. His armor was a nightmare of twisted brass and flayed banners, his left arm ending in a chain glaive that roared with teeth the size of swords. They charged. Caelus reacted instantly, firing his thermal cannon in a blinding burst. The shot caught Malmorth in the chest, slagging the traitor's upper armor, exposing screaming metal beneath. But the beast kept coming. They collided atop the submerged plaza, water surging in all directions as the night titans clashed. Caelus brought his chainsword up to meet the glaive, the two weapons locking in a storm of sparks and shrieking metal. Malmorth's blade raked across the Oathbound's chest, carving deep into the pauldrons. Caelus countered, knee pistons firing, shoulder ramp catching Malmo's torso with a crash that sent both machines stumbling. Then, a flash of inspiration. He ducked low, letting Malmor swing high, and drove his chainsword up under the guard straight into the elbow joint of the traitor's glaive arm. The blade screamed as it bit deep. Servos burst. Hydraulic fluid sprayed in gouts of steaming black. The chain glaze arm snapped, hanging by a sparking thread of cabling and ruined pistons. Malmorth howled, not just in rage, but in pleasure. "Yes, that's it, boy. Strike me again. I want to remember you." Caelus stepped back, scanning quickly. He was winning. For the first time he had landed a crippling blow. The battlefield was in his favor, the traps, the terrain, all set. But Malmor didn't retreat. Didn't falter. Instead, the traitor lunged, head lowered, shoulder cannons unleashing a barrage of warp-tainted flares that lit the sky in unnatural light. The Oathbound Wrath stumbled as multiple impacts rocked its frame. Warning glyphs screamed across the interface. Caelus hissed as pain lanced down his spine. He tried to reposition, but Malmorth had already vanished into the ruin again, disappearing behind a veil of collapsing steel and whispering servo-cherubs. Gone. Vanished, like a ghost. Caelus stood, panting, scanning the darkness. The only sound now was the water lapping at broken stone. No movement. No signal. The Oathbound Wrath growled low, its machine spirits shaking with frustration. They had wounded the predator, but had not slain it. Caelus sat back in the throne, blood dripping from his temple. Malmorth had let the arm go, had sacrificed it, played along with the trap, made him believe he was winning. And now the predator was out there again, watching. The game continued. Chapter 6. Nightfall. Dawn never came to Vraxos Magna. The sky remained a bruised smear of swirling ash and unnatural light, like the rotting lid of a world long forgotten by mercy. In that dim, eternal twilight, amid the rusting bones of titanic machines and hollow hives, war did not sleep. It seethed. The oath-bound wrath trudged forward through the drowned ruins, each step dragging through sludge and shattered ferrocrete. Its left shoulder still smoked from the last engagement, the armor scored with gaping rents that exposed sparking cable bundles and fluid-seeping pistons. Caelus had reinitialized half his systems with battlefield repairs, but the knight was limping, tired, wounded, and hunted. Within the throne mechanicum, his veins throbbed with adrenaline and pain. The bond with his knight was tenuous, frayed around the edges. The deeper the damage, the more wild and feral the machine spirit became. It hated what had been done to it, hated the corrupted cousin that haunted these ruins. "Old brother," Caelus muttered. "Not yet, not like this." The knight did not answer in words. It never did. But he could feel its reluctant stillness, like a starving beast obeying only because the leash had not yet snapped. Up ahead loomed the shattered ruins of a once proud stronghold, the former bastion of House Dravon, Mal Morth's ancestral house. What remained of its defenses were buried beneath mountains of collapsed stone and mutated scrap metal. Spires of once regal architecture now leaned like crooked teeth around a cratered central keep. Banners of honor had long rotted to tatters, replaced with chains of skulls and cloth stitched from flayed skin, inscribed with scripture that twitched when watched. The chaos growths infested everything, bloated cysts of blackened flesh and brass spewing smoke and warp light. Massive eye-like formations blinked from the walls, some screaming in binary, others silently weeping steaming pus. The air tasted like hot copper and incense. A few half-melted statues of ancient Dravon heroes stood amidst it all, faces disfigured, mouths split wide in eternal laughter. This place was no longer a house. It was a temple, and Malmurth was its god. "He's here," Caelus said aloud. Waiting, and then the world screamed. The first surge of psychic energy hit like a blade across the mind. Caelus cried out as the cockpit went white. No screens, no audio, no input, just blinding raw noise. The oath-bound wrath jerked, stumbling mid-stride as if something had punched through its very soul. Symbols bloomed across the interface, runic gibberish in blood-red glyphs, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Malmorth was attacking, not with steel, but with mind. "Do you feel it, little knight?" The voice infected the vox, but also came from inside the throne, inside Caelus's skull, inside the machine. It was like someone whispering directly into his nerves, wrapping cold fingers around his brainstem. "This was my home once, my throne, my chapel, and now it is a garden of truth." The oath-bound wrath convulsed, its right arm locking, head snapping to the side, as the corrupted data tried to force its way into the knight's machine spirit. Caelus screamed, slammed his hands onto the haptic cores, overrode the feed. He forced a reboot, rerouted power through emergency cogitator backups, bypassed the vox entirely. The symbols flared once more, then flickered out. The light returned, and Malmoth stood there. Across the courtyard of the defiled bastion, the desecrator loomed, taller than before, wrapped in layers of black iron and brass filth, half his chest still melted from the earlier fight. His glaive arm was gone, replaced now with a warflesh tentacle limb, fused with serenetic blades that twitched like they breathed. His remaining eye burned with raw psychic fire, and his engine whispered in dead tongue. "Let me end you." He charged. Caelus barely reacted in time, sidestepping, swinging his chainsword in a wide arc. Steel and corruption collided in an explosion of shrieking metal. The force knocked the oathbound wrath backward, staggering across the defiled Ralvon courtyard. Malmorth came again, blade limbs slashing through ruined columns, bringing one crashing down atop them both. Caelus ducked, raising his arm to shield his cockpit, but stone and steel hammered down on him, burying the knight's lower torso beneath rubble. "Come on, move." He fired the thermal cannon point blank. The blast struck Malmor's torso, blowing chunks of demon-forged armor into the air. But the traitor knight didn't stop. He grabbed the oathbound's head with one massive clawed hand and slammed it into the ground. The cockpit jolted, sparks flew. Caelus tasted blood as his lips split on impact. "So weak," Malmor hissed. "You wear your father's crest, but you don't bleed like him." Caelus activated the knee-mount rocket ram, fired it directly into Malmort's leg. The impact tore through muscle analogies and servo flesh. The traitor howled in pain and stumbled, but not before driving his blade limb into the oathbound's shoulder, through it. Red lights filled the cockpit. Power drain, servo failure, coolant pressure, 0. The left arm went dead. Caelus slumped, vomiting onto the command plate from the pain feedback. He could barely see. Malmor towered above the downed knight, triumphant. His frame dripped blood and fire. His helm bent low, like a priest delivering the last sermon. "You die here, son of Dravon. Alone, forgotten. Your bones will warm my altar." The tentacle blade rose, seething with warp flame. The interference hit. A high-pitched scream shattered the air, audible to no ear but felt in the soul. Malmorth froze. The blade halted. His head snapped sideways. "No." "What?" Something surged across the airwaves. A signal. Pure, blinding, holy. Caelus gasped as the interference lifted from his mind, his connection to the oathbound wrath stabilizing, briefly, just long enough to activate the emergency thrusters. He fired all retros. The knight exploded upward, ripping free from the rubble, staggering backward on one leg, chainsword raised in one functioning hand. The source of the signal was unknown, untraceable, but its effect was immediate. Malmorth reeled, shrieking, sparks flying from his carapace as his corrupted systems convulsed. The warp flames around him dimmed, flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Caelus didn't hesitate. He struck. The chain sword slammed into Malmort's hip joint, sawing through armor and cursed bone, splitting the limb down to the thigh. Malmort reeled, falling to one knee with an impact that cracked the earth. But then the signal faded, and the madness returned. Malmorth's helm snapped up, his vox emitting a howl of rage and exhilaration. The warp flames surged back with renewed fury. Des. Caelus turned and ran. He launched smoke grenades from his carapace, flooded the courtyard in thick black mist, and limped away into the ruins, one leg dragging, shoulder torn, power surging into redline. He didn't know who or what had saved him, but he would not waste it. As he disappeared into the ruins, smoke curling behind him like the breath of a dying god, Malmor's roar echoed through Vraxos Magna like a funeral bell. "You cannot hide forever, Caelus. I will break your bones and feast on your name." The hunt continued. Chapter 7. The Dead Remember. The world beneath Vraxos Magna was older than the city that crowned it. Far below the cratered boulevards and shattered cathedrals, past the drowned manufactura and fossilized war zones, lay a forgotten tier of the hive. An ancient Mechanicus data vault, its existence stricken from most records, its secrets entombed in rust and silence, carved deep into the earth like a neural lobe into the skull of a dead god. It had once served as a sacred archive, a place of order, logic, and calculation, untouched by the madness that now festered above. It was here that Caelus Dravon limped. The oath-bound wrath moved in agony. Its frame was half-shattered, left shoulder a hollowed ruin, reactor bleeding coolant, Vox symptoms flickering with echoing screams that hadn't been broadcast. One leg dragged with every step, servos grinding like bones being broken slowly, repeatedly. But it still moved, still obeyed. Caelus had pushed the knight to its limits, then beyond them, and now, out of ammo, half-blind and burning, they had fled together into the guts of the hive. Through forgotten tunnels that hadn't seen light in centuries, through passages choked with collapsed pipework and hanging wire veins like iron entrails, through a final adamantium door sealed by non-standard code cipher, which the oath-bound wrath had recognized instantly. Because it had been here before? The vault was cold, not in temperature, but in sensation. Sterile. Dead. The air was still and heavy, untouched by decay but absent of breath. The walls were perfectly smooth, inscribed with binary inscriptions and dormant pick panels. Dust did not linger here. Nothing moved. Time had frozen. Yet the place was not abandoned. Faint green lumens still glowed in the ceiling like watching eyes, and the corridor ahead was flanked by rows of mummified tech priests, their corpses seated upon thrones of copper, hardwired into the walls, metal fingers fused to control lecterns. Each skull had been ritually engraved with data code. A few still twitched, motionless but active, in some mindless looping maintenance loop. Caelus dismounted the knight. He staggered from the cockpit, his blood still crusted in patches across his temple and spinejects. His vision blurred from stress and trauma, and the haptic rig had left nerve burns across his palms, but his purpose burned brighter than his pain. The oath-bound wrath remained kneeling behind him in the entry chamber, reactor on standby, watching, waiting. Caelus passed into the central data chamber, a massive domed sanctum filled with 100,000 cogitator stacks. Each one was ancient, humming with faint life, stacks of bronze and plasteel tubes nested into vaulted racks like ammunition in a giant's magazine. He activated one of the primary consoles. Initiate search, Melmoth. Cross-recommended House Ralvorn. Origin classification, Knight designation GL489, codename Glory Untarnished. The cogitator groaned, then pulsed. Files emerged. //log // Magos Dominus Iris Erix entry 1189 Subject Olix Varn, Senior Scion of House Ralvorn, Pilot of Dravon-class Knight. Glory Untarnished. Observed behavioral instability during the third month of the Vraxos campaign. Decline coincides with exposure to sealed sublevels beneath Manufactorum 7 Eta. These levels were previously unrecorded and under quarantine pending purgation. Reports from subordinate magi indicate the presence of unauthorized cultic structures and warpcraft symbols embedded into the infrastructure itself. Within 72 hours of contact, Knight began transmitting irregular vox chants during power-down cycles. Machine spirit exhibited autonomous ritual behavior. Armored systems began adapting of their own volition, warping, repairing, or integrating non-standard tech of unknown origin. Subjects' combat behavior shifted, excessive brutality, increased reliance on melee, self-destructive charges, unprovoked attack on House Ralvorn Bondkin, resulting in fatalities. Declared excommunicatus. Purging efforts failed. Reclassified as Malmor the Desecrator. Caelus' hands tightened on the console. He read further. Footage clips. Grainy picture captures. Malmorth's transformation had not been gradual. It had been welcomed. Olix Varn had descended into the black zones beneath Vraxos, and something had spoken to him there. Something older than chaos. Something buried in the bones of the hive, from the days when the galaxy still screamed with birth pain. And he had listened. He'd return changed, dragging whatever he had found back into his night like a disease, and the glory untarnished had not resisted. The bond had warped. The throne mechanicum invited the corruption. But it wasn't the final file that broke Caelus' breath. It was the locked archive, hidden deep within the Knight's own encrypted system, a time-sealed memory log, accessible only from Mechanicus interfaces, marked by the sigil of House Dravon. The file glowed in crimson rune script, greater than personal / log Halric Dravonon Mega. Caelus opened it. The screen flickered. His father's voice filled the room. Caelus, if you're hearing this, then I've failed. I thought I could stop him. Olix, he was my brother in arms. We trained together, rode together, fought side by side on the black dunes of Haroth. He saved my life more times than I could count, and now he wears the skin of a diamond. I followed him into the catacombs when the first reports came. I saw what he had become. I saw his knight, no longer a throne of honor, but a cathedral of suffering. The machine spirit didn't weep. It sang for blood. He tried to speak to me, not with words, but with something deeper, a pressure, a temptation. I think the oathbound wrath heard it too, but it refused. That's the difference, Caelus. That's what you must understand. The throne does not make you. You make it. Every bond is a mirror. If you carry doubt, it grows. If you carry hate, it festers. If you carry purpose, it becomes fire. You will face Malmorth one day, and he will break you if you carry only vengeance. He feeds on fury. He is made from it. You must be more Indian, not for me, for the bond, for the code, for what we were before the rot. I'm proud of you. Make them remember. The message ended. Caelus stood alone in the cold glow of the cogitator, fists clenched, heart hammering like thunder in his chest. The echoes of his father's voice burned in his mind like a brand. Not vengeance. This wasn't about a single death. It wasn't even about the honor of House Dravon. Malmorth was spreading his infection, his corruption, his madness through every cogitator he touched, through every scrap drone he possessed, through every echo of pain that lingered in the ash of this world. And if he rose, if he escaped Vraxos, others would follow. Knights would fall. The oath-bound wrath trembled behind him. Not in pain, in purpose. Caelus returned to the cockpit. The throne hissed as it accepted him. The bonds reconnected. Blood met machine. The night roared to life. There would be no more running. The dead remembered, and the living would avenge. Chapter 8. Ascension of Wrath. The vault groaned awake around him, as if stirred by the weight of a coming storm. Caelus knelt inside the cockpit of the oath-bound wrath, sweat and blood drying on his skin like ceremonial paint. The knight's machine spirit pulsed beneath him, alive, wounded, and eager. For the first time in days, the throne mechanicum felt balanced, not wild and furious, but focused, like a sword drawn from its scabbard. The resonance in the link was no longer angry or erratic. It had listened to the voice of Halric Dravon. Now it waited for Caelus to act. He touched the command runes on the hololithic display, fingers flying through Ben-Heric sequences lifted directly from the vault's forbidden archive. Flash, unlocking deep protection, lineage, pathway, Sigil Dravon Delta, Primaris. A low rumble shook the cockpit. For a heartbeat, the lights dimmed. Then the main core howled, and the night's interior lit with a deep crimson pulse. Caelus felt it in his teeth. The deeper systems had awoken. These were ancient warseps, locked away from common use, buried after the Vraxian sendering, known only to scions initiated into the full rites of House Dravon's sacred vaults. Caelus had read of them only in half-redacted tomes. His father had once spoken of them in hushed tones, a warning rather than a lesson. Now they were his. He triggered the Armagerum Conflagratus, a ritual awakening of the Knight's subcore wargear racks. Somewhere within the Oathbound's frame, massive servos ground open age-locked vaults, sealed with symbols in silver and sanctified wax. Runes of activation burst to life across the displays. Irrelevant. Access confirmed. Folkland's Justicar's blaze. Statue operational. Recognize Maul, Reckoner, status, charged. He smiled through the pain. The Justicar's blaze had not been fired in centuries. It was a Volkite siege lance, a weapon banned on many Forge worlds due to the severity of collateral damage it wrought. It didn't just vaporize flesh, it boiled it from within, atom by atom, until targets collapsed into burning cinders. A weapon of justice so terrible it had been hidden away lest its wrath consume friend and foe alike. And the Reckoner. A graviton maul forged in the hellforges of Tarsus Ultra. Shorter range than the lance, but in close combat it could collapse armor plating into compressed implosions, crush limbs into metal paste, and shatter shield matrices with a single, impossibly heavy blow. Caelus locked both weapons into the Knight's servo mounts, replacing his ruined left chainsword arm with the maul and slinging the Volkite lance across the shoulder coupling previously used for the thermal cannon. Servo stimulants hissed through the cockpit. The machine growled in approval. "Not yet," Caelus muttered. "We still bleed." He set to work on repairs. With schematics from the Mechanicus vaults, he rerouted core systems through dormant circuits, energy lines that hadn't been used in generations. The cooling unit was bypassed entirely, replaced with a direct bleed vent to the reactor's surface casing. Risky, dangerous. It would mean overheating after prolonged combat, but the price was power. Speed. The damaged leg joint was reinforced with ferroceramite bracing plates, stripped from a nearby collapsed Magos sarcophagus. The shoulder was patched with a heavy slab of adamantium shielding torn from a collapsed corridor door, welded into place with directed melter bursts. For the right pauldron, where Melmorth had driven his weapon deepest, Caelus did not use metal. He affixed the skull of one of the mummified tech priests, bolted it in place as a warning. May your logic fuel our vengeance. The Knight's silhouette had changed. Where once it had marched with grace and nobility, now it resembled a wounded revenant, dragging ancient firepower, wearing the bones of the dead, its war gear fused from sacred relics and battlefield scrap. But it stood tall. It was ready. Caelus stood before the cockpit's shrine. Even the throne mechanicum, half gamine, half casket, held a space for prayer. A tiny niche inset into the control panel, holding a flickering glow lumen, a bronze icon of the Emperor, and a sanctified purity seal scrawled with high Gothic script. He removed his gauntlet. His hand trembled as he pressed his fingers to the shrine. Not from fear, it's from weight, from purpose. By the light of the golden throne, his voice cracked. He swallowed, forced it back. The legacy of my blood and the spirit of the machine that walks beside me. I swear upon these oaths, old and new, I will end the traitor who defiled this world. I will make the galaxy remember. And should I fall, let my body burn as a beacon against the dark. He paused. He then added, quieter. Father, guide my hand. The lumen flared. The cockpit sealed shut. The night rose. The oath-bound wrath was reborn. No longer a tool of House Dravon. Now it was vengeance given form. Its engines roared as Caelus throttled power through the main drive, heat shimmers blooming from the chassis. Its footsteps cracked the vault floor with each stride. Sparks trailed from its heels as it surged through the tunnels, up toward the hollow corpse of Vraxos Magna. Above, Malmorth waited in his throne of filth and glory. The final war approached, and this time the wrath would ascend. Chapter 9. Duel of Titans. Vraxos Magna had a heart once. He beat in the central spire, a monolithic pillar of steel and stone, where the Administratum, the Ecclesiarchy, and the Mechanicus had once intertwined like serpents around a throne. 1,000 meters tall, crowned with golden aquilae and armored bastions, the spire had stood as a symbol of imperial unity, of indomitable will. Now, it was a cratered cathedral of ruin. The spire had fallen inward centuries ago, buried by orbital fire and tectonic collapse. The wreckage formed a jagged caldera filled with broken monuments, collapsed cathedrals, shattered night stations, and strata of debris that had fused into grotesque shapes over time. Shrines reduced to slag, vox towers melted into rib-like arcs, bones crushed into the mortar between cracked stone slabs. At the crater's core, the hive's main power core still pulsed beneath the surface, a cyclopean reactor deep within the planet's crust, once capable of sustaining the energy demands of half a sector. Now, it lay buried, dormant, but not dead. And above that broken, toxic womb of energy, they met. 2 war engines, 2 souls, 2 reflections of what had once been men. The oath-bound wrath stepped into the crater, each footfall splitting ancient stone. Its chassis hissed with heat, black smoke trailing from its vents like wings of ash. Reinforced armor clattered with every movement, plates welded in fire and sanctified in silence. The Justicar's blaze Vokite lance hummed with suppressed fury at its side, coils glowing with molten red light, and the Reckoner Maul, cradled in its other hand, pulsed with gravitic distortion so dense it made the air shimmer around it. Inside, Caelus's body trembled from strain. Blood seeped from the ports at the base of his neck where the throne jacks met flesh. His left eye was nearly swollen shut, ribs splintered from neural feedback shock. A few of his fingertips had turned blue where the haptic nodes had overloaded, but his grip remained firm, his voice steady. The machine was what mattered now. The bond was total. And across the crater, emerging from a broken arch of rusted bone and rebar, came Malmorth the Dissecrator. He was massive, larger than before, bulked by dark blessings, his ruined arm replaced not with metal, but a twisting fusion of flesh and warp fire, ending in a triple-jointed claw glowing with infernal script. His helm was crowned with horns of fused brass. Trophy banners streamed behind him, covered in glyphs that bled and reknit themselves endlessly. His chest plate still bore the blackened crater where Caelus had burned through him in their last clash. But it hadn't been repaired. He wore the wound with pride. His vox opened first. "Come, little prince of ash. Come see what your line has purchased with all their death." Caelus toggled his external vox. "No more riddles, Oleg." "Alas, Longheart." A beat. A chuckle. Malmorth's voice crawled with layered static and things that whispered beneath words. "You use that name like it still matters. That man died in the dark." I heard his last scream inside my soul when the throne opened. I was reborn in fire. In truth, "You are never reborn," Caelus snapped. "You are hollowed, replaced. What's in there now isn't Olix Varn, it's a beast wearing his name." "Then speak no more, and face the beast." Malmorth surged forward. The Dissecrator's claw burst with energy. Warp fire bleeding across the ground in its wake, his reaper talon carving through a cathedral buttress like it was tissue. His mutated servo limbs snarled as he gained speed. Caelus charged to meet him. The craters shook. They collided with a sound like gods breaking mountains. Steel struck steel. The reckoner slammed down and impacted Malmorth's shoulder, crushing through demonic plating with an implosion that sent shockwaves in every direction. Debris exploded into the air. Malmorth responded with a sideways sweep of his claw, raking the Oathbound's flank. Armor screeched as the warp-forged blade sliced deep, cutting into primary plating, nearly reaching the reactor sheath. Caelus screamed as the feedback crashed into him. Blood sprayed from his mouth, painting the inside of the cockpit. He fired the Justicar's blaze at point blank. The Volkite lance ignited, lashing out in a column of coruscating red fire. The beam hit Malmorth's center mass, and flesh boiled. Armor blistered. The beam didn't just burn, it vaporized, atoms unraveling in layers of scorching agony. Malmorth staggered. But he laughed. Yes, yes, make me feel alive. He lunged again, slamming his mutated claw into the Oathbound's right side. The cabin lurched. Warnings howled in Caelus's mind. Systems buckled. The right arm went dead, the Volkite lance destroyed in an instant. "Come on!" Caelus roared, yanking on the control rig. "Not yet! Not yet!" The Oathbound responded. From one knee, the knight drove the Reckoner up and under Malmorth's carapace, smashing into the joint at the enemy knight's hip with gravitic force that collapsed matter inward. The limb imploded, molten and compressed, causing Malmorth to falter, stumble, fold. The desecrator hit the earth hard, crushing a chunk of collapsed statue beneath him. For a heartbeat he lay still. Caelus stood over him, battered and bleeding. But as he raised the Reckoner to strike the killing blow, the desecrator moved, not as a machine, but as something more, faster than logic, driven by rage that transcended mortal speed. Malmorth lashed out with his remaining claw. It pierced the Oathbound torso, tearing through armor, through the secondary reactor, into the cockpit itself. Caelus screamed as the blade tore through his side, impaling him through the hip. The cockpit erupted in sparks. Fluid and blood sprayed across the throne. The pain was indescribable, hot, sharp, wet. His limbs spasmed, lungs flooded with iron. The throne mechanicum bucked beneath him, neural feedback shorting out his senses. The bond nearly shattered. But it didn't. The Oathbound wrath didn't let go. "We fall, together," Caelus gasped. "But we finish it first." The Reckoner lit with red warning glyphs. Overload protocol engaged. The Maul was not meant to be used this way. The gravitational core would detonate. Caelus forced the knight to its feet, half dragging Malmorth with it, the claw still embedded in his body. Step by step, the Oathbound pushed forward, toward the center of the crater, toward the buried power core that still pulsed with fractured energy beneath the ruins. Malmorth realized too late. "Ha ha ha! What do you know? No! You would not burn in your throne." And then they fell. Oathbound wrath tackled Malmorth, both titans slamming through the cracked earth, through layers of stone and steel, through the strata of old hive infrastructure and into the glowing reactor chasm below. The impact split the crater like an egg, hurling fire and smoke into the air. In that final descent, locked in death's embrace, Caelus saw Malmorth's face. Not through the cockpit, not through sensors, but in the mind link. Between machines. It was not a demon. It was a man, broken, screaming, terrified. Then, in light, the explosion was not a sound. It was a silence so loud it erased everything. A pillar of golden fire tore from the center of Vraxos Magna. blooming like a sun reborn, consuming the heart of the hive and the two war engines locked within. The power core ruptured in a chain reaction that split the sublevels, igniting ancient plasma reserves and awakening hells long buried. For miles, the dead city shuddered, and then stillness. Silence reigned in the crater. Only the ash remained, only the fire. The duel of titans had ended. Chapter 10. Ashes and Legacy. The fire had no color. It burned with light beyond the spectrum of natural flame, a blinding inferno of plasma and warp-bled energy vomiting upward from the shattered heart of Vraxos Magna. It consumed the clouds. It incinerated the air. 1,000 echoes of demonic shrieks and rupturing steel rang through the dead city, like the final breath of a dying god. At the edge of the blast crater, the world had gone silent. Nothing moved. The wind was gone. Ash fell in lazy spirals from a sky smeared with soot and sunless gloom. The very bones of the hive trembled beneath the destruction. Roads had collapsed into glowing canyons. Statues had melted into slag. Ancient hab structures leaned like weeping towers toward the source of the explosion, their walls pocked with fireglass. Then, through the shimmering curtain of heat and dust, something stirred. A silhouette rose from the flames. Broken, burning, triumphant. The oath-bound Wrath emerged from the crater on one leg, dragging the other like a shattered limb, half its armor gone, venting thick black smoke from every exhaust port. Its entire left side was melted, plating curled like parchment, heat-bled cables swaying loose and sparking. The Volkite lance had been disintegrated. The Reckoner's handle hung from a ruined servo mount, fused and scorched. Its helm had been split down the center, the once noble crest of House Dravon charred to a blackened smear. But it stood. Within the cockpit, Caelus Dravon clung to life by will alone. His skin was scorched, his chest crushed under snapped restraints. The throne jacks were fused into his spine, the neural harness oversaturated with pain feedback. Blood covered every surface, from his mouth, his ears, the tips of his fingers. His heartbeat was failing, fluttering like a dying wing. And yet, through one unclouded eye, he watched the screens. He was still in the fight, and Malmorth was gone. The Desecrator's night had been vaporized in the blast. Nothing remained, no limb, no carapace, no demon screams. Not even the warp taint lingered in the air. The fire had been clean, powered not only by the rupture of the hive's ancient core, but by the sacrificial overload of the Justicar's blaze, whose power cell had detonated in the final descent. There would be no resurrection for Malmol, no echo, no memory, just ash. The oath-bound Wrath took one final step and collapsed to its knees, the thunderous impact shaking the ruins around it. The cockpit buckled but did not break. Caelus's head lolled forward. His body spasmed once, weakly, as the last of the emergency power bled through the interface. In his fading vision he saw a flicker of golden light on the edge of the crater. Movement. A shape passed through the gloom. Then another. And 5. Night Titans, tall and proud, their lances raised in salute, their carapaces bearing the unmistakable red and obsidian heraldry of House Dravon. The lead knight bore a vox sigil flaring with urgency. "This is Sir Varner of House Dravon. Scanning wreckage. Emperor's blood. Contact. I have contact. It's the Oathbound by the throne. He's alive." The survivors converged. Time passed in fragments. He awoke in a Medicae cradle inside a dropship, barely conscious as servo drones worked to remove the burned plating from his spine. Voices echoed like ghosts, Chirurgeons barking orders, a robed chaplain murmuring litanies to a portable shrine, his name repeated over and over. "Sir Caelus, stay with us. The line endures. You are not alone." He paused into darkness and woke again, this time to the filtered sunlight of a mountain dawn above Ebonhold Bastion. Weeks later, he stood. A wound given shape, bones knitted by augmetic surgery, flesh scarred with sacred filigree. A high-collared robe of black and crimson hung over his frame. His left arm, now mechanical from shoulder to fingertip, bore a purity seal made from Malmorth's scorched war banners retrieved from the edge of the blast. The high table of House Dravon had convened in the Hall of Oaths. Every scion, every pilot, every vassal and armiger stood to witness. Lord Regent Talric knelt before him, as tradition dictated, and offered the seal of command, an ancient relic embedded with the blood code of 100 ancestors. Clytus Dravon, son of Halric, slayer of the desecrator, bearer of the oath-bound wrath, we name you High Scion. He took it in silence, and the hall erupted in war chant. Outside the fortress, a new statue was raised. Carved from obsidian and ash stone, pulled from the ruins of Vraxos Magna itself, it depicted two knights locked in final battle, one wreathed in fire, the other in shadow. At the statue's base, etched in silver script, "Here fell Malmor the Desecrator, here rose Caelus Dravon, last light of the line, remember them as wrath, as flame, as oath." In the halls of knights, where scions told tales by firelight and steel, the battle became legend. The duel whispered across forge worlds and war fronts alike. The duel of the ashen wreck. And in the cold, quiet moments between wars, when Caelus stood alone in the reforged cockpit of the oath-bound wrath, staring into the void, he did not feel triumph. He felt the weight of legacy, and the silence of vengeance finally laid to rest.